Welcome to the Marple Files, Miss Marple's home for solving captivating mysteries.
In the shadowed halls of Crestwood Hall, a scream pierces the night Leonard Ashburn lies dead, a bloodied statuette beside him. Who wielded it? Was it the nervous Clara, her bracelet hiding a secret, the proud Charles, tangled in hidden deals, or the calculating Dr. Philip, driven by desperation? As lies unravel and clues whisper dirt by an open window, a cryptic note, a trace of red paint Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple weave through a web of deceit. Will the truth emerge before another falls? Dive into Miss Marple Drowns Out the Lies, a chilling Agatha Christie-style mystery where every detail holds a deadly secret. Chapter 1. The gathering at Crestwood Hall. The late summer sun cast a golden haze over Crestwood Hall, a sprawling Georgian manor nestled in the rolling hills of Devonshire. Its ivy-clad walls and mullioned windows exuded an air of timeless dignity, but beneath the polished surface, a quiet unease stirred. The occasion was the annual gathering of the Ashburn family, a tradition upheld since Sir Reginald Ashburn, the late patriarch, had made his fortune in textiles. Now, his widow, Lady Beatrice Ashburn, presided over the estate with a steely grace that belied her 70 years. The drawing-room was abuzz with the clink of teacups and the murmur of polite conversation. Lady Beatrice, seated in a high-backed chair, surveyed her guests with a hawk-like gaze. Her eldest son, Charles, a barrister with a penchant for expensive cigars, lounged by the fireplace. His wife, Evelyn, at his side, her smile as brittle as the porcelain she held. Their daughter, Clara, a pale, nervous girl of 22, fidgeted with her bracelet, her eyes darting toward the door. Across the room, Beatrice's younger son, Leonard, a playwright of middling success, argued animatedly with his cousin, Dr. Philip Marwood, a dour physician whose practice in London had seen better days. Philip's wife, Margaret, a former actress with a penchant for dramatics, sipped her tea with exaggerated daintiness, her gaze fixed on Leonard's animated gestures. The final guest, Miss Jane Marple, sat quietly in a corner, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. To the unobservant, she was merely a frail, elderly spinster, invited out of courtesy for her distant connection to the Ashburns through a long-dead cousin. But her sharp blue eyes missed nothing, and her mind, honed by years of quiet observation, catalogued every glance, every pause, every half-spoken word. "It is a pity," Lady Beatrice said, her voice cutting through the chatter, "that Mr. Grayson could not join us this year. His investments have been most valuable to the family." Charles snorted, masking it with a cough. "Valuable to some, perhaps. His schemes are as risky as Leonard's plays." Leonard's face reddened. "At least my work doesn't rely on fleecing widows, Charles." "Gentlemen, please," Evelyn interjected, her voice sharp. "This is hardly the time." Miss Marple's needles paused for a fraction of a second, her lips twitching into a faint smile. The Ashburns were a family bound by wealth and resentment, and the cracks in their civility were already showing. She noted the time for 15 p.m. as the mantel clock chimed and the way Clara's fingers tightened around her bracelet at the mention of Mr. Grayson, a financier whose absence was keenly felt. Dinner was announced, and the party moved to the dining room, where the long mahogany table gleamed under candlelight. The meal was sumptuous roast pheasant, creamed potatoes, and a claret that Charles praised excessively, but the conversation grew strained. Philip spoke little, his eyes fixed on his plate, while Margaret recounted a theatrical anecdote that elicited only polite chuckles. Clara excused herself halfway through, claiming a headache, and Leonard followed soon after. muttering about a script revision as coffee was served in the drawing room. A scream shattered the evening's calm. It came from the library, a room. At the far end of the hall, the guests froze, teacups clattering. Charles was the first to move, striding toward the sound, with Philip and Evelyn close behind. Miss Marple, unhurried, set her knitting aside and followed. Her steps measured but purposeful. In the library, Clara stood trembling, her hands pressed to her mouth. On the floor, sprawled beside an overturned chair, lay Leonard Ashburn. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, a thin trickle of blood seeping from a wound at his temple. A heavy bronze statuette, one of Sir Reginald's prized antiques, lay beside him, its base stained red. "He's dead," Philip said, kneeling briefly to check for a pulse. His voice was flat, almost clinical. Lady Beatrice, entering last, gasped and clutched the doorframe. "My son," she whispered, her face ashen. Miss Marple's eyes swept the room, the open window, the scattered papers on the desk, the clock on the mantel reading 8:47 p.m. She noted the statuette's position, the angle of Leonard's body, and the faint smudge of dirt on the carpet near the window. The Ashburns were a family of secrets, and one of those secrets had just turned deadly. "Someone must call the police," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "Yes," Miss Marple murmured, her tone gentle but firm. "And perhaps someone should send for a friend of mine, a gentleman who has a way with such matters." The room turned to her, surprised by the quiet authority in her voice. "Who?" Charles demanded. "Miss Jane Marple," she replied, her eyes gleaming with quiet resolve. "But for now, let us ensure nothing in this room is touched. The truth, you see, is often in the smallest details." Chapter 2. The shadow of the Crimith Library at Crestwood Hall was a somber tableau, its heavy oak shelves and leather-bound volumes now overshadowed by the grim presence of death. Leonard Ashburn's body lay where it had fallen, the bronze statuette glinting malevolently in the lamplight. The air was thick with shock and suspicion, and the Ashburn family stood frozen, their faces a gallery of grief, fear, and calculation. Miss Jane Marple stood near the doorway, her small figure almost invisible in the chaos. Her eyes, however, were anything but idle, darting from the smudged carpet to the open window, where a faint breeze stirred the velvet curtains. The clock on the mantel read 8:52 p.m., and she noted the precise moment when Charles, his face flushed with agitation, barked at the butler to telephone the police. "Quickly, man," Charles snapped, "and tell them it's urgent, a murder." The word hung in the air, stark and undeniable. Evelyn clutched her husband's arm, her knuckles white, while Clara, still trembling, sank into a chair, her eyes fixed on the floor. Lady Beatrice, her composure regained, stood rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line. Dr. Philip Marwood remained by the body, his clinical detachment at odds with the nervous twitch of his fingers. Margaret, his wife, hovered near the fireplace, her theatrical poise crumbling as she wrung her hands. Miss Marple stepped forward, her movements deliberate. "If I may," she said softly, her voice cutting through the tension, "it would be wise to preserve the scene exactly as it is. The police will wish to see everything untouched." Charles turned to her, his brow furrowed. "And who are you?" "To give orders, Miss Marple. A guest, nothing more." "Charles, please," Evelyn hissed, her eyes darting to the elderly spinster. "She's only trying to help." Miss Marple's smile was serene, but her gaze was sharp. "I have had some experience in such matters, Mr. Ashburn. A friend of mine, a most remarkable detective, has taught me the value of observation. The smallest detail, a thread, a footprint, a misplaced object can speak louder than words. Philip looked up from the body, his expression guarded. She's right. We shouldn't disturb anything. The police will need to examine everything. His voice faltered on the last word, and Miss Marple noted the way his eyes flicked toward the desk, where a pile of papers lay in disarray. The butler returned, breathless. The police are on their way, sir. They'll be here within the hour. And I took the liberty of contacting that gentleman Miss Marple mentioned. He's in the area, it seems, and will arrive shortly. Lady Beatrice raised an eyebrow. And who is this gentleman? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. A man of singular intellect. Lady Beatrice. His name is Hercule Poirot. A murmur rippled through the room, a mix of curiosity and unease. Charles scoffed. A foreigner? What can he do that the police cannot? Much, I assure you, Miss Marple replied, her tone gentle but firm. Monsieur Poirot has a way of seeing what others overlook. As the family absorbed this, Miss Marple's attention returned to the room. The open window was curious to low for an easy escape, yet the smudge of dirt on the carpet suggested someone had been near it. The statuette, heavy and ornate, bore no obvious fingerprints, but its position suggested it had been deliberately placed, not dropped. And then there was Clara's bracelet, which she now clutched tightly, its clasp slightly bent as if caught on something. The police arrived first, led by Inspector Grange, a gruff man with a no-nonsense demeanor. He surveyed the scene, his notebook already open. Right, then. Nobody leaves this house until we've got statements. Dr. Marwood, you've confirmed death? Philip nodded. Blunt force trauma to the temple. Death was likely instantaneous, around 8:45 p.m. Based on the body's condition. Grange scribbled a note. And you all heard the scream at what time? 8:47, Miss Marple said quietly, drawing a sharp look from the inspector. The clock in the library is quite precise. Grange grunted, clearly unaccustomed to such contributions from elderly ladies. He began questioning the family, starting with Clara, who stammered that she had come to the library to fetch a book, and found Leonard already dead. Her alibi was vague. She had been wandering the house after dinner, and Miss Marple noted the way. Her eyes avoided her mother's as Grange moved on to Charles. A soft knock at the front door announced the arrival of Hercule Poirot. He entered with his characteristic precision, his small, neat figure clad in an immaculate suit, his mustache waxed to perfection. His green eyes swept the room, lingering on each face before settling on Miss Marple. Ma chère Mademoiselle Marple, he said, bowing slightly. It is a pleasure to see you, though the circumstances are, Hellas, most unfortunate. Indeed, Monsieur Poirot, she replied, her voice warm but measured. I knew you would come. Poirot turned to the inspector, offering a polite nod. Inspector Grange, I presume. Hercule Poirot, at your service. I am here to assist, if you permit. Grange bristled but nodded. Fine. But don't interfere. This is a police matter. Of course, Poirot said smoothly, his eyes already scanning the room. He approached the body, his movements deliberate, and crouched to examine the statuette. Curious, he murmured. The blood is only on the base, not the handle, and the angle of the wound. Most interesting. Miss Marple watched him closely. Her knitting resumed, the needles clicking softly. She knew Poirot's methods, his obsession with order, his reliance on the little gray cells to untangle the knots of human behavior. Already, she could see the gears turning in his mind. piecing together the fragments of this grim puzzle as Poirot rose. He addressed the room. Mesdames et messieurs, a crime has been committed, and the truth lies hidden among you. I ask only that you speak honestly when questioned. The smallest lie, you see, can be the key to everything. The family exchanged uneasy glances, and Miss Marple's needles paused once more. The truth, she knew, was a slippery thing, but with Poirot's rival, the hunt for it had truly begun. Chapter 3. The rival of ordered library at Crestwood Hall was now a stage, its somber atmosphere pierced by the quiet authority of Hercule Poirot. The police, under Inspector Grange's brusque direction, had cordoned off the area round Leonard Ashburn's body, but Poirot's presence seemed to impose a different kind of order, one not of tape and notebooks, but of the mind. Miss Jane Marple sat in her corner, her knitting needles clicking softly, her eyes tracking Poirot's every move. She knew his method, the meticulous observation, the probing questions, the way he seemed to see through people as if they were glass. Poirot stood by the fireplace, his small hands clasped behind his back, his head tilted slightly as he surveyed the room. The Ashburn family had been shepherded into the drawing room, but their voices, sharp with nerves or muted with grief, carried faintly through the walls. Inspector Grange, after a brief consultation with his constables, approached Poirot with a scowl. "Mr. Poirot," Grange said, his tone clipped, "I've agreed to let you observe, but this is my investigation. We've got a murder, a weapon, and a house full of suspects. I don't need amateur theatrics." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. "Theatrics, Inspector? Non. I seek only the truth, which is, hellas, often obscured by haste. Permit me to ask a few questions, and I shall not trouble you further. For now." Grange grunted, clearly unimpressed, but waved a hand. "Fine, but keep it quick." Poirot turned to the room, his green eyes gleaming with purpose. "Mademoiselle Marple, you were here when the body was discovered. Tell me, what did you see?" Miss Marple's needles paused, and she looked up, her expression serene but alert. "I saw what everyone saw, Monsieur Poirot. Poor Leonard, lying there, the statuette beside him, the papers scattered on the desk. But I also saw the window open, with a smudge of dirt on the carpet nearby. And Clara, dear Clara, was quite distraught, clutching her bracelet as if it might anchor her." Poirot nodded, his gaze sharpening. "The bracelet, you say? Most interesting. And the time?" "The clock read 8:47 when we heard the scream," she replied. "I am quite certain of it." Poirot paced slowly toward the window, his polished shoes silent on the carpet. He examined the smudge, a faint streak of earth, barely noticeable unless one looked closely. "This dirt," he murmured. "It is not from the room. It is fresh, from the garden, perhaps. And the window, low enough for someone to climb through, but not without effort." Grange, overhearing, snorted. "You're suggesting someone came from outside. The family was all at dinner, except the girl and the victim." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone non-committal. "But the truth, Inspector, does not always follow the most obvious path." He moved to the desk, where the scattered papers caught his eye. Among them was a letter, half crumpled, addressed to Leonard in a sharp, angular hand. Poirot lifted it carefully, noting the date 3 days prior and the signature, H. Grayson. The contents were cryptic, a mention of debts repaid and a final reckoning. Poirot's brow furrowed, but he said nothing, tucking the letter into his pocket with a glance at Grange for approval. The inspector nodded reluctantly. We'll catalog it. But don't go playing detective with evidence. Poirot inclined his head, then turned to Miss Marple. Mademoiselle, you mentioned a friend of the family, Mr. Grayson. Was it? He is not here, yet his name lingers in the air. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Oh, yes, Mr. Grayson is a financier, quite close to Lady Beatrice. His absence this weekend was remarked upon, especially by Charles, who seemed displeased. Poirot's smile was faint but knowing. Displeased, you say? The emotions of a family are like the threads of a tapestry, pull one, and the pattern shifts. He requested the family's return to the library, and they filed in, their faces a mixture of apprehension and defiance. Charles stood with his arms crossed, Evelyn at his side, her lips tight. Clara, still pale, avoided looking at the body, while Lady Beatrice's gaze was steely, as if daring anyone to challenge her authority. Philip and Margaret stood apart, his expression unreadable, hers tinged with nervous energy. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice soft but commanding, a tragedy has occurred, and I, Hercule Poirot, will uncover its truth. I ask each of you to recount your movements from 8 o'clock this evening until the scream was heard at 8:47. Precision. Please, every minute matters. Charles spoke first, his tone brusque. I was in the dining room until 8:30, then went to the billiard room for a cigar. Alone. I heard the scream and came straight here. Evelyn nodded. I was with Charles until he left the dining room. I stayed to speak with Mother Lady Beatrice about household matters until the scream. Lady Beatrice's voice was crisp. I remained in the dining room with Evelyn. We were discussing the estate accounts. Clara's voice trembled. I left dinner early. Around 8:15. I had a headache and wandered the house. I came to the library to find a book and found him. Philip cleared his throat. I was in the conservatory, checking some medical journals. I heard the scream and arrived just after Charles. Margaret's laugh was sharp, almost hysterical. I was in the drawing room, practicing lines for a new play. I didn't even know Leonard was in the library until the scream. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind cataloging each statement, each hesitation. Merci, he said. We shall speak more tomorrow. For now, I ask that you remain in the house. The truth. It is like a puzzle, each piece must fit perfectly. As the family dispersed, Miss Marple approached Poirot, her voice low. Monsieur Poirot, did you notice Clara's bracelet? The clasp is bent, as if it caught on something, and the letter you found it mentions Mr. Grayson, who was not fond of Leonard's ambitions. Poirot's mustache twitched. You are observant, Mademoiselle Marple. The bracelet, the letter, the dirt, these are the threads we shall weave together. But for now, let us retire. The little gray cells, they must rest to see clearly. As they left the library, the clock struck 9:30, and Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. The truth was close, she felt, but tangled in a web of lies that only Poirot's precision could unravel. Chapter 4. The art of the question. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Crestwood Hall, casting long shadows across the breakfast room where the Ashburn family gathered in uneasy silence. The clatter of silverware was subdued, and the air hung heavy with the weight of Leonard's death. Miss Jane Marple, seated at the far end of the table with a modest plate of toast and tea, observed the strained faces around her. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, sipped his tisane with deliberate calm, his green eyes flicking from one guest to another. Inspector Grange had left a constable to guard the library, but Poirot had requested permission to conduct private interviews, a concession Grange granted with a grudging nod. "Just don't muddy the waters, Mr. Poirot," he had warned before departing to confer with the coroner. Now, Poirot sat at the head of the table, his small frame radiating authority, ready to begin his inquiries. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice soft but clear. "Last night, a crime was committed, and each of you holds a piece of the truth. I shall speak with you individually, and I ask for honesty. The smallest omission can obscure the pattern of justice." Charles Ashburn set down his coffee cup with a clink. "This is absurd. The police are handling it. Why should we submit to your theatrics?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "Theatrics, Monsieur Ashburn. Non. I seek only order, and the truth is a thing of order. You will speak with me first, if you please." Charles bristled but followed Poirot to the morning room, a smaller chamber with tall windows overlooking the rose garden. Miss Marple, invited to observe, settled into a chair by the window, her knitting in her lap, her presence so unobtrusive that Charles barely noticed her. Poirot began, his tone deceptively mild. "Monsieur Charles, you were in the billiard room from 8:30 until the scream at 8:47. We? Alone?" Charles nodded, his jaw tight. "Yes. I wanted a cigar and some peace. Dinner was tiresome. And you heard nothing unusual? No footsteps, no voices?" "Nothing until Clara's scream." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "You spoke harshly of Mr. Grayson yesterday. He is a financier, I understand, with ties to your family. Tell me, what is your quarrel with him?" Charles hesitated, his fingers drumming on the armrest. "Grayson's a shark. He's been pushing Mother to invest in risky ventures. Leonard was cozying up to him, probably hoping for a handout. I didn't trust either of them." Poirot nodded, jotting a note in his small black notebook. "And your brother's debts, were they significant?" Charles's face darkened. "Leonard was always in debt. Bad investments, worse plays. Ask Mother. She bailed him out more times than I can count." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, and she noted the bitterness in Charles's voice, the way his eyes avoided Poirot's. When Charles was dismissed, he left with a scowl, brushing past Evelyn, who was next. Evelyn sat primly, her hands folded in her lap. "I was with Mother in the dining room," she said before Poirot could ask. "We were discussing the estate accounts until the scream." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet, madam, you seemed distracted at dinner. Your daughter, Clara, left early. Did you know where she went?" Evelyn's lips tightened. "Clara had a headache. She often does. I assumed she went to her room. But she did not." Poirot pressed gently. "She was in the library, where she found your brother-in-law. Did she speak of him often?" Evelyn's eyes flickered. "Clara and Leonard were close. He encouraged her painting, unlike Charles, who thinks it frivolous. But she couldn't have hurt him." Miss Marple noted the protective edge in Evelyn's voice, the way her hands clenched at the mention of Clara. Poirot moved on to Lady Beatrice, whose interview was brief, but revealing. "Leonard was reckless," she said, her voice cold. "He borrowed heavily, and Mr. Grayson was displeased. I warned him to settle his debts, but he laughed it off." Clara was next, her pale face and trembling hands betraying her nerves. "I didn't see anything," she whispered. "I went to the library for a book, and there he was, dead." Poirot's gaze softened, but his question was sharp. "Your bracelet, Mademoiselle Clara. It is damaged, the clasp bent. Did it catch on something last night?" Clara's hand flew to the bracelet, her eyes wide. I don't know. It must have happened earlier. I didn't notice. Miss Marple's needles paused. Clara's hesitation was telling, and the bent clasp, she suspected, was no accident. Poirot dismissed Clara gently and turned to Dr. Philip Marwood. Philip was composed, his answers precise. I was in the conservatory, reading. I heard the scream and came at once. The wound was fatal, struck with force. The statuette was the obvious weapon. Obvious, Poirot murmured. But the obvious is not always the truth. You knew of Leonard's debts to Mr. Grayson? Philip's jaw tightened. I heard rumors. Leonard was careless. Grayson's not the forgiving type. Finally, Margaret Marwood swept in, her theatrical flair undimmed by the tragedy. I was practicing lines in the drawing room, she said, her voice dramatic. I heard nothing until Clara screamed. Poor Leonard, he was so talented, so misunderstood. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet, madam, you did not seem fond of him at dinner. A disagreement. Perhaps. Margaret laughed, a brittle sound. Oh, just artistic differences. Leonard thought my performances lacked depth. He could be cruel. As Margaret left, Poirot turned to Miss Marple, his voice low. Each tells a story, mademoiselle, but not the whole story. The bracelet, the letter from Grayson, the dirt by the window, these are pieces of the puzzle. But the heart of it lies in the human soul. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes bright. Indeed, Monsieur Poirot, and I suspect Clara knows more than she says. Her bracelet, it caught on something, or someone. In that library. Poirot's smile was approving. We shall see. Tomorrow, I shall examine the scene again. The truth. It is close, but it hides. Behind the lies. The clock struck 10, and the house settled into an uneasy quiet, the weight of suspicion settling over Crestwood Hall like a fog. Chapter 5. The scent of deception that morning at Crestwood Hall was cloaked in a mist that clung to the gardens, softening the edges of the Georgian manor but doing little to ease the tension within. The Ashburn family moved through breakfast with mechanical politeness, their eyes avoiding one another, each aware that suspicion hung over them like a storm cloud. Hercule Poirot, seated at the table with his customary tisane, observed the strained silences, his mind piecing together the fragments of the previous day's interviews. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting ever present, sat opposite, her sharp gaze noting the smallest gestures. Charles's fidgeting with his cufflinks, Evelyn's forced smile, Clara's refusal to meet anyone's eyes. Poirot had requested a second examination of the library, and Inspector Grange, though skeptical, had permitted it, provided a constable accompanied him. As the family dispersed, Poirot beckoned Miss Marple to join him. Your eyes, Mademoiselle Marple, see what others miss. Come, let us uncover what the library whispers. The library was as they had left it, save for the chalk outline where Leonard's body had lain. The bronze statuette had been taken for evidence, but its absence did little to diminish the room's grim atmosphere. Poirot moved with deliberate precision, his gloved hands tracing the edges of the desk, the window frame, the carpet. Miss Marple stood near the fireplace, her knitting set aside, her attention fixed on the smudge of dirt by the window. Inspector Grange believes the killer entered through here, Poirot said, gesturing to the open window. The dirt, he thinks, is proof of an outsider. But I, Hercule Poirot, am not so convinced. Miss Marple nodded. The dirt is fresh, Monsieur Poirot, but the window is low, scarcely a foot from the ground. An outsider would have left more traces, perhaps. or disturb the flowerbed outside. Yet it's untouched. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Precisement. And the statue at its base was stained with blood. But the handle was clean. Too clean, perhaps, for a weapon seized in a moment of passion. He knelt by the desk, examining the scattered papers. Among them, he found a small notebook, its pages filled with Leonard's scrawled handwriting. Poirot flipped through it, pausing at an entry dated 2 weeks prior. Grayson threatens ruin. Must act soon. See. Knows too much. He showed it to Miss Marple, his expression grave. See. Miss Marple murmured. Clara, perhaps. Or Charles. Poirot tucked the notebook into his pocket, ensuring the constable saw him do so. We shall see. But this notebook, it tells us Leonard was afraid. And fear, mademoiselle, is a powerful motive. Their inspection was interrupted by the arrival of Clara, who hovered in the doorway, her face pale. Monsieur Poirot, I needed to speak with you, she stammered, glancing nervously at the constable. Poirot's tone was gentle but firm. Of course, mademoiselle. Speak freely. Clara twisted her bracelet, the bent clasp catching the light. I didn't tell you everything yesterday. I saw Leonard in the library before dinner, around 7:30. He was arguing with someone. I couldn't see who, it was dark, and I only passed by the door. But he sounded angry, desperate even. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And you did not think to mention this before. I was frightened, Clara whispered. I didn't want to make things worse. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice soft. My dear, did you recognize the other voice? A man, a woman? Clara shook her head. I couldn't tell. It was low, almost a whisper. But Leonard said something about debts and no more chances. Poirot exchanged a glance with Miss Marple. Merci, Mademoiselle Clara. You have been most helpful. But tell me, your bracelet, when did it become damaged? Clara's hand froze. I don't remember. It must have been earlier that day. I'm always catching it on things. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but she said nothing. Poirot dismissed Clara with a nod, then turned to the constable. Please ensure no one enters this room until I return. The truth. It is beginning to take shape. As they left the library, Poirot spoke softly to Miss Marple. The argument Clara overheard, it points to Grayson, or perhaps someone closer. And the bracelet. It is no accident, I think. It caught on something in that library, something that links Clara to the crime. Miss Marple nodded. She's protecting someone, Monsieur Poirot, or hiding something. Young girls often do, when they're afraid. Poirot's mustache twitched. Fear. Yes. But whose fear? That is the question. They returned to the drawing room, where the family awaited, their alibis now under scrutiny. Poirot announced his intention to question them again, this time focusing on their movements before dinner. Charles, predictably, was indignant. This is harassment. I told you. I was in the study until dinner. And yet, Poirot said, smoothly, the study is near the library. Did you hear nothing? No voices. No argument. Charles's face reddened. Nothing. I was working. Evelyn's alibi was unchanged. She had been with Lady Beatrice, but Lady Beatrice herself hesitated when asked about the hour before dinner. I was in my sitting room, she said, writing letters. I heard nothing unusual. Philip, however, faltered when pressed. I was in the conservatory, as I said. But I did step outside briefly, around 7:30, to check on my car. It's parked near the library window. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And did you see anyone near the library? No, Philip said quickly. Too quickly, Miss Marple noted. Margaret's story remained flamboyant but vague. I was rehearsing. As I told you, I don't keep track of time when I'm in character. As the interviews concluded, Poirot and Miss Marple stepped into the garden, where the mist was beginning to lift. The alibis. They are like a house of cards, Poirot said. One push, and they will collapse. But we need one more clue. One more thread to pull. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the flower bed beneath the library window. Monsieur Poirot, have you noticed the roses? They're pristine, not a petal disturbed. Yet the dirt inside suggests someone stepped there. Perhaps someone who knew how to step lightly. Poirot's smile was approving. You are a marvel, Mademoiselle Marple. Tomorrow, we shall set a trap. The killer. They will reveal themselves. For no one can hide from the little gray cells forever. The clock in the hall struck 11, and the mist began to clear. But the shadows of deception lingered over Crestwood Hall. Chapter 6. A clue in the details. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Crestwood Hall, casting a soft glow over the drawing room where the Ashburn family sat in uneasy silence. The weight of Leonard's murder pressed upon them, each glance and gesture laced with suspicion. Hercule Poirot, his demeanor as precise as ever, stood by the fireplace, his small hands clasped behind his back. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically, occupied a chair near the window, her serene expression masking the keen observation of every detail. Poirot had spent the morning revisiting the library with Inspector Grange's reluctant permission, accompanied by Miss Marple and the ever-watchful constable. The smudge of dirt by the window, the pristine flower bed outside, and the clean handle of the statuette had deepened his conviction that the crime was not as it appeared. Now, he prepared to probe further, seeking the one detail that would unravel the tangled web of lies. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice cutting through the room's tension. We have spoken of alibis and movements, but the truth lies in the small things, the things one does not think to hide. I ask you now to consider. What did you see? What did you hear? In the moments before the tragedy. Charles Ashburn shifted uncomfortably, his cigar unlit in his hand. You've asked us this already, Poirot. I was in the study. I heard nothing. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet, monsieur, the study is but a door away from the library. A raised voice, a scuffle. Surely something reached your ears? Charles's jaw tightened. I told you, nothing. Evelyn, seated beside him, spoke up, her voice strained. We were all distracted, Monsieur Poirot. Dinner was lively. Leonard was in one of his moods, arguing with everyone. Miss Marple's needles paused, and she tilted her head. Arguing. Mrs. Ashburn. With whom? Exactly. Evelyn hesitated, her fingers smoothing her skirt. Well, with Charles, mostly. About money, as usual. And with Philip, about some medical matter. Leonard was always so provocative. Poirot turned to Dr. Philip Marwood, who sat stiffly, his hands clasped. Monsieur le Docteur, you mentioned being in the conservatory, yet you stepped outside near the library window at 7:30. Did you see Leonard then? Philip's eyes flickered. No. I was checking my car, as I said. The library curtains were drawn. Curious, Poirot murmured. The curtains were open when the body was found. Who, I wonder, opened them? A ripple of unease passed through the room. Clara, pale and silent, clutched her bracelet, the bent clasp glinting in the light. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, but he turned to Margaret Marwood next. Madam, you were practicing lines in the drawing room. Did you, perhaps, hear voices from the library? It is not far. Margaret's laugh was sharp, almost forced. I was lost in my role, Monsieur Poirot. I heard nothing but my own voice. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. A fine performance, no doubt, Mrs. Marwood. But even actresses notice the world around them, do they not? Margaret's smile faltered, but she said nothing. Poirot paced slowly, his polished shoes silent on the carpet. Let us consider a detail, he said. The notebook found on the desk, belonging to Monsieur Leonard. It speaks of a threat from Mr. Grayson and mentions C. Knows too much. Who is this C? The room stilled. Charles's face reddened, and Clara's hand froze on her bracelet. Lady Beatrice, her voice icy, spoke first. Leonard was reckless with his words. He often wrote nonsense in that notebook. It means nothing. Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone mild but probing. But I have also learned that Monsieur Leonard was in debt to Mr. Grayson a considerable sum. And yet, someone in this house knew more than they have said. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. Mademoiselle Clara, you overheard an argument in the library before dinner. You said it was about debts. Did you hear a name Grayson, perhaps? Clara's eyes widened, and she shook her head. I didn't hear a name, just voices. I swear it. Poirot nodded, but Miss Marple noted the way Clara's fingers tightened on her bracelet, the bent clasp catching her sleeve. It was a small thing, but in Miss Marple's experience, small things often told the largest stories. After the family dispersed, Poirot and Miss Marple retreated to the garden, where the roses glowed in the afternoon light. Poirot plucked a petal, examining it as if it held a secret. The notebook, the bracelet, the dirt, these are not random, Mademoiselle Marple. They point to a truth someone wishes to hide. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze on the flower bed beneath the library window. The bracelet, Monsieur Poirot. It's not just bent, it's cut threads from Clara's sleeve, as if it was torn in a struggle. And yet, she claims she was only in the library to fetch a book. Poirot's mustache twitched. A struggle, oui. But with whom? And why does she protect them? We must press further, but carefully. The killer is clever, but not as clever as Hercule Poirot. They returned to the house, where Poirot requested a private word with the butler. Mr. Harrow, the elderly servant, his face lined with worry, confirmed the family's movements as best he could. Master Leonard was in the library before dinner, sir, Harrow said. I saw him there at 7, looking at papers. He seemed agitated. And did anyone join him? Poirot asked. Harrow hesitated. I thought I saw Miss Clara pass by the library door, but I couldn't be sure. It was dark in the hall. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she listened. Clara again, always Clara. The girl was at the heart of this, willingly or not. As the clock struck 3, Poirot announced his intention to reconstruct the evening's events. Tonight, he said to Miss Marple, we shall gather them all, and watch their faces. The truth. It will slip through the cracks of their lies. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Like a stitch dropped in knitting, Monsieur Poirot. One small error, and the whole pattern unravels. The stage was set, and the truth, though still hidden, was drawing closer with every careful step. Chapter 7. The cracks in the fabricated evening at Crestwood Hall descended with a heavy stillness, the air thick with the unspoken fears of its inhabitants. The drawing room, lit by the soft glow of lamps and the flicker of the fireplace, was a stage for suspicion. Each member of the Ashburn family seated in a semicircle as if awaiting judgment. Hercule Poirot stood at the center, his small, neat figure commanding attention, his green eyes glinting with purpose. Miss Jane Marple sat to one side, her knitting needles silent for once, her gaze as sharp as a hawk's as she observed the subtle shifts in posture and expression. Poirot had requested this gathering, ostensibly to clarify the timeline of the fateful evening, but Miss Marple knew his true intent: to apply pressure, to watch for the cracks in the carefully constructed alibis. Inspector Grange, though skeptical of Poirot's methods, stood by the door, his notebook ready, his expression one of grudging curiosity. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice smooth but edged with steel, "we are here to reconstruct the moments before Monsieur Leonard's death. The truth, it hides in the shadows of your words, but it cannot hide forever. Let us begin with the hour before dinner, 7 to 8 o'clock. Who saw Monsieur Leonard? And where?" Lady Beatrice, her posture rigid, spoke first. "I was in my sitting room, writing letters. I did not see Leonard after tea." Poirot's mustache twitched. "And yet, madam, the butler saw Leonard in the library at 7, looking agitated. Did no one else pass by?" Charles shifted in his seat, his cigar unlit. "I was in the study. As I've said, I didn't see him." Evelyn's voice was tight. "I was with Clara in the drawing room until she left for her headache. I didn't see Leonard." Clara's hands twisted in her lap, the bent clasp of her bracelet catching the firelight. I passed the library, as I told you. I heard him arguing, but I didn't go in." Poirot's gaze lingered on her, and the voice, "Mademoiselle Clara, you said it was low, a whisper, but was it familiar? A man's voice, perhaps?" Clara's eyes darted to her mother, then away. "I couldn't tell. It was too faint." Miss Marple noted the tremble in Clara's voice, the way her fingers clutched the bracelet as if it were a lifeline. Poirot turned to Dr. Philip Marwood, whose clinical calm seemed strained. "Monsieur le Docteur, you were near the library window at 7:30, checking your car. Did you hear this argument?" Philip's jaw tightened. "No. The conservatory is quiet, and I was focused on my task." Margaret, ever theatrical, tossed her head. "I was in the drawing room, rehearsing. I heard nothing but my own lines." Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Curious, is it not? An argument in the library. Yet no one hears it clearly. And yet, we have other clues. The notebook of Monsieur Leonard speaks of a threat from Mr. Grayson and a mysterious sea. Who knows too much? And then there is the bracelet of Mademoiselle Clara bent, with threads caught in its clasp, as if it were torn in a struggle." Clara gasped softly, her hand covering the bracelet. Evelyn's face paled, and Charles's eyes narrowed. Lady Beatrice's voice cut through the tension. "You're suggesting Clara was involved? That's preposterous." Poirot raised a hand. "I suggest nothing, madam. I observe. The bracelet. It tells a story, and the dirt by the window fresh. Yet the flower bed outside is untouched. Someone was in that library, someone who knew how to move carefully." He turned to the group, his voice softening but no less piercing. "Let us consider a hypothesis. Suppose Monsieur Leonard was not alone in the library. Suppose someone argued with him, perhaps about debts or secrets. Suppose this person struck him with the statuette, then opened the window to suggest an outsider. But they forgot one thing: the dirt. It does not lie." Margaret's laugh was shrill. "You're spinning tales. Monsieur Poirot, an outsider. Makes more sense than accusing one of us, does it? Poirot said, his eyes locking onto hers. The statuette's handle was clean, madam. A stranger would not think to wipe it. But someone who knows this house, someone who knows the value of appearances might. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them. Miss Marple's gaze flicked to Philip, whose fingers twitched nervously, and to Evelyn, whose eyes were fixed on Clara with a mixture of fear and protectiveness. Poirot continued, his tone deliberate. I propose a small experiment. Tonight, after dinner, we shall recreate the scene. Each of you will return to where you claim to have been at 8:30. Mademoiselle Marple and I will observe. The truth, it has a way of revealing itself under pressure. Charles stood, his face flushed. This is outrageous. You're treating us like criminals. Poirot's smile was serene. Not criminals, monsieur. Suspects. There is a difference, but only until the truth is found. As the family dispersed, their murmurs of discontent trailing behind, Miss Marple approached Poirot, her voice low. You've stirred the nest, Monsieur Poirot. Clara's bracelet, those threads are from her sleeve, but the weave suggests it caught on something rough. Perhaps the statuette itself. Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. We, mademoiselle, and Philip's hesitation, Evelyn's protectiveness, they are threads in the same tapestry. Tonight, we shall pull them and see what unravels. The clock struck 7, and the house settled into a tense anticipation. The recreation loomed, and with it, the promise of a crack in the facade that hid Leonard's killer. Chapter 8. The breaking point dining room at Crestwood Hall was a study in strained civility. As the Ashburn family gathered for dinner, the clink of cutlery and the murmur of forced conversation barely masking the undercurrent of dread. Hercule Poirot's proposed reconstruction of the evening of Leonard's murder loomed over them, and each face bore the marks of unease. Charles's scowl, Evelyn's taut smile, Clara's pallor, and Lady Beatrice's icy composure. Miss Jane Marple, seated quietly with her untouched glass of sherry, observed the scene with her usual acuity, her knitting needles resting in her lap, their silence as telling as their customary rhythm. Poirot, impeccable in his evening attire, had orchestrated the meal to precede the reconstruction, knowing that the pressure of anticipation would loosen tongues and reveal truths. Inspector Grange, though skeptical, had agreed to attend, his constable stationed at the door, notebook in hand. The clock on the mantel read 7:45 p.m., and the air was thick with the weight of what was to come. As the dessert plates were cleared, Poirot rose, his small figure commanding the room. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, his voice clear and deliberate. Tonight, we shall retrace your steps from the evening of Monsieur Leonard's death. Each of you will return to where you claim to have been at 8:30, and we shall observe the truth. It is like a shadow, it moves when the light shifts. Charles slammed his napkin onto the table. This is madness, Poirot. You're staging a performance, not solving a crime. Poirot's mustache twitched. A performance, monsieur. Perhaps, but the stage is where masks slip, and I, Hercule Poirot, am most attentive to such slips. Lady Beatrice's voice was cold. Let us get this over with, then. I was in the dining room with Evelyn. Shall we sit here and wait for your theatrics? Poirot inclined his head. Precisement, madam. And the others, please. To your places. The family dispersed reluctantly. Charles to the billiard room, Philip to the conservatory, Margaret to the drawing room, and Clara, hesitating, to the corridor where she claimed to have wandered. Poirot and Miss Marple, accompanied by Inspector Grange, moved to the library, where the chalk outline of Leonard's body remained a stark reminder of the crime. At precisely 8:30 p.m., Poirot signaled for the reconstruction to begin. He stood by the library window, his eyes scanning the room, while Miss Marple positioned herself near the desk, her gaze fixed on the doorway. The constable moved between rooms, ensuring each person remained in place. The silence was broken by a sudden cry from the corridor. Clara, her voice trembling. "I can't do this. I can't." She stumbled into the library, her face ashen, her hands clutching her bracelet. "I lied," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I wasn't here with Leonard before he died." The room stilled, and Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. "Mademoiselle Clara, speak plainly. What happened in this library?" Clara sank into a chair, her voice barely audible. "I came to talk to him at 8, after I left dinner. He was upset, talking about debts and Mr. Grayson. He said someone was going to ruin him. I tried to calm him, but he pushed me away, and my bracelet caught on the statuette. I left him alive, I swear." Evelyn rushed into the room, her face pale. "Clara, stop. You don't have to say anything." Poirot raised a hand, his voice gentle but firm. "Madam, let her speak. The truth. It is her only refuge now." Clara's sobs grew louder. "I heard someone else come in as I left. I didn't see who. It was dark, and I ran to my room. When I came back later, he was dead." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was racing. The bent clasp, the threads caught in it. Clara's story fit, but it was incomplete. She glanced at Poirot, who nodded almost imperceptibly, as if reading her thoughts. Inspector Grange stepped forward, his tone gruff. "Miss Ashburn, are you saying you were in the library at 8? Why didn't you tell us?" "I was scared," Clara whispered. I thought you'd think I did it." Poirot turned to the family, who had gathered at the library door, drawn by Clara's cry. "This changes the timeline, Ms. Amos. Mademoiselle Clara was here at 8, and someone else entered after. Who among you was not where you claimed?" Charles's face reddened. "This is absurd." Clara's confused. "That's all." Philip's voice was tight. "I told you. I was in the conservatory. I didn't come near the library." Margaret's eyes darted nervously. "I was rehearsing. I didn't even know Leonard was here." Lady Beatrice's voice was sharp. "Enough of this. Clara is distraught. She's not thinking clearly." Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. "Someone is not distraught, madam. Someone is calculating. The dirt by the window, the clean statuette, the notebook, these are not accidents. And now, Mademoiselle Clara's confession points to a truth we cannot ignore." Miss Marple spoke softly, her voice cutting through the tension. "Monsieur Poirot, the threads on Clara's bracelet, they match her sleeve. But the statuette's base is rough, pitted. It could have caught her bracelet, but it could also have been held by someone else, someone who wiped it clean." Poirot's smile was faint but approving. "Oui, Mademoiselle Marple. The statuette was wiped, but not perfectly, and the dirt it was placed, not tracked. Someone wishes us to believe in an outsider, but the truth is closer to home." As the family stood frozen, Poirot's voice softened. "We shall pause here, Ms. Amos. Mademoiselle Clara, you have been brave. Tomorrow, we shall gather again, and the truth will no longer hide." The clock struck 9 p.m., and the library fell silent, but the air crackled with the weight of Clara's confession and the secrets yet to be uncovered. Chapter 9. The trap is set. Morning at Crestwood Hall dawned with a deceptive calm. The mist that had clung to the gardens now burned away by a pale sun. Yet, within the manor, the atmosphere was anything but serene. Clara's confession the previous evening had shattered the fragile veneer of the Ashburn family's unity, and now each member moved with the cautious tread of one who knows they are watched. Hercule Poirot, his demeanor as polished as his patent leather shoes, sat in the morning room with a cup of tisane, his green eyes glinting with purpose. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting resumed, sat opposite, her needles clicking softly as she observed the family's strained interactions. Through the open door to the breakfast room, Poirot had spent the early hours reviewing his notes, the pieces of the puzzle, Clara's bracelet, the wiped statuette, the smudge of dirt, Leonard's notebook arranging themselves in his mind. Clara's admission had shifted the timeline, placing her in the library at 8, but the identity of the second visitor remained elusive. Poirot knew the killer was among them, and tonight he would set a trap to draw them out. Mademoiselle Marple, he said, his voice low, you have seen the threads of this mystery. Clara's confession is a step toward the truth, but it is not the whole truth. Someone entered the library after her, and that someone is nervous now. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled over her knitting. Indeed, Monsieur Poirot, Clara's bracelet tells a story, but so does the silence of the others. Dr. Marwood, for instance, his hands tremble when Leonard's debts are mentioned. And Evelyn. She watches Clara as if guarding a secret. Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching. Precisement. Tonight, we shall gather them all and apply pressure. The guilty. They will falter when the light of truth shines too brightly. The day passed in a haze of tension, with Inspector Grange and his constable continuing their inquiries while Poirot and Miss Marple observed from the sidelines. Grange, though gruff, had begun to respect Poirot's insight, allowing him to question the family further. Poirot requested a private word with Dr. Philip Marwood, whose clinical composure seemed increasingly brittle. In the conservatory, surrounded by the faint scent of hothouse flowers, Philip sat stiffly, his hands clasped. I've told you everything, Poirot, he said, his voice clipped. I was checking my car at 7:30, then in the conservatory until the scream. Poirot's gaze was piercing. And yet, monsieur, you were near the library window. The curtains, you said, were drawn, but they were open when the body was found. Did you see nothing? No shadow, no movement? Philip's fingers twitched. Nothing. I wasn't looking at the library. And Monsieur Leonard's debts to Mr. Grayson. Poirot pressed. You knew of them. Did they concern you? Philip's eyes flickered. Leonard was reckless. Grayson's a dangerous man to owe money to. But that's all I know. Miss Marple, seated quietly, noted the sweat beading on Philip's brow, the way his hands clenched at the mention of Grayson. As he left, she murmured to Poirot, He's hiding something, Monsieur Poirot. Not the whole truth, but a piece of it. Poirot nodded. And tonight, we shall uncover it. At 8 o'clock, the family gathered in the drawing room, their faces a gallery of apprehension. Poirot stood before them, his small frame radiating authority. Inspector Grange stood by the door, his expression skeptical but attentive. Miss Marple sat near the fireplace, her knitting a soft counterpoint to the tension. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, we are close to the truth. Mademoiselle Clara has told us she was in the library at 8, arguing with Monsieur Leonard. She left him alive, but someone entered after. Tonight, I shall reveal what I know, and we shall see who falters. He paced slowly, his eyes scanning each face. The statuette was wiped clean, but not perfectly. Traces of blood remained on the base. The dirt by the window was placed, not tracked, to suggest an outsider. And the notebook, it speaks of Grayson's threat and AC. Who knows too much? But there's more. A thread, caught in Mademoiselle Clara's bracelet, matches her sleeve, but also carries a trace of red paint, not unlike that used in her artwork. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her bracelet. I don't understand. I paint. Yes, but I wasn't painting that night. Poirot's smile was gentle but unyielding. Perhaps not, mademoiselle. But the paint, it was fresh, and it was found on the statuette's base, hidden beneath the blood. Someone touched that statuette. Someone who had handled paint. Evelyn's voice was sharp. You're accusing Clara? She's told you everything. Not everything, Poirot said softly. And not only Clara. The paint suggests a connection to her. But the timing, someone else was in that library. I ask now, who among you has handled red paint recently? The room fell silent, but Margaret's face paled, her hands twisting in her lap. I was working on a prop for my next play, she stammered, a red-painted frame. But I was in the drawing room, not the library. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet, madam, the drawing room is close. A step, a moment, and one could be in the library. Did you see Monsieur Leonard after dinner? Margaret's laugh was brittle. No, I told you. I was rehearsing. Miss Marple's needles clicked once, a deliberate sound. Mrs. Marwood, she said gently, you mentioned Leonard criticized your performances. Did that upset you? Margaret's eyes flashed. He was cruel. Yes, but I didn't kill him. Poirot raised a hand. Enough for now. The trap is set, Ms. Amos. Tomorrow, I shall reveal the full truth. Sleep well if you can. As the family dispersed, their faces etched with fear, Miss Marple leaned toward Poirot. The paint. Monsieur Poirot, it's a clever clue. But Margaret's reaction. She's not the only one hiding something. Philip's hands, they trembled. Again, Poirot's smile was grim. We, mademoiselle. The net tightens. Tomorrow, the killer will have nowhere to hide. The clock struck 9, and Crestwood Hall settled into a restless night. The trap set, and the truth poised to spring. Chapter 10. The unveiling of truth. Drawing room at Crestwood Hall was suffused with a tense anticipation, the late morning light filtering through the heavy drapes to cast long shadows across the polished floor. The Ashburn family sat in a semicircle, their faces a mixture of dread, defiance, and exhaustion. Hercule Poirot stood at the center, his small figure radiating an almost theatrical authority, his green eyes gleaming with the certainty of revelation. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting set aside, occupied a chair near the fireplace, her serene demeanor belying the sharpness of her observation. Inspector Grange, his notebook open, stood by the door, his skepticism tempered by a grudging respect for Poirot's methods. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice steady and deliberate. We have reached the moment of truth. A crime has been committed, a life taken, and the threads of deception have been woven tightly. But the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot, they do not falter. Let us unravel this mystery. Step by step, he paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Monsieur Leonard Ashburn was struck down in the library at approximately 8:45 p.m. The bronze statuette, wiped clean of fingerprints but stained with blood and a trace of red paint, was the weapon. The dirt by the window, placed to suggest an outsider, was a lie. The notebook, with its talk of debts and a mysterious sea, pointed to secrets. And Mademoiselle Clara's bracelet, bent and threaded with her sleeve, told a story of struggle. Clara's hand flew to her bracelet, her eyes wide. Charles shifted uncomfortably, while Evelyn's face tightened with protective instinct. Lady Beatrice's gaze was icy, and Philip's hands twitched nervously. Margaret, her theatrical poise fraying, clutched her shawl. Poirot continued, his tone measured. Let us begin with the timeline. Mademoiselle Clara, you were in the library at 8, arguing with Monsieur Leonard about his debts to Mr. Grayson. You left him alive, but your bracelet caught on the statuette, tearing threads from your sleeve. You heard someone else enter as you left. Who was it? Clara's voice trembled. I didn't see. It was dark, and I ran to my room. Poirot nodded. But someone was there. Let us consider the clues. The statuette's handle was clean, suggesting a deliberate act to erase evidence. The dirt by the window was fresh, yet the flower bed outside was untouched, a staged clue. And the red paint, found on both the statuette and Clara's bracelet, links to someone who handled it recently. He turned to Margaret, whose face paled. Madame Marwood, you admitted to working with red paint for a theatrical prop. You were in the drawing room, close to the library. Did you enter it that night? Margaret's laugh was shrill. No, I was rehearsing, as I told you. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet, madam, your husband, Dr. Marwood, was near the library window at 7:30, checking his car. He said the curtains were drawn, but they were open when the body was found. Curious, non? Philip's jaw tightened. I didn't go inside. I told you. I was in the conservatory after. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, monsieur. Let us consider another detail, the notebook. It spoke of Grayson's threat and C. Knows too much. Who is this C? Charles, perhaps, who despised Leonard's financial recklessness. Or Clara, who knew of his debts. Charles stood, his face flushed. This is outrageous. I was in the billiard room. Poirot's smile was serene. Oui, monsieur. But the billiard room is not far from the library. And you, Madame Evelyn, were protective of Clara. Did you know she was in the library? Evelyn's voice was sharp. I didn't know. I was with Mother in the dining room. Lady Beatrice nodded. We were discussing accounts. I knew nothing of Leonard's whereabouts. Poirot paused, his gaze sweeping the room. And yet, someone did. Someone entered the library after Clara struck Leonard with the statuette, and staged the scene. The paint, the dirt, the wiped handle, these are the work of a careful mind. But not careful enough. He turned to Philip, his voice softening but unyielding. Monsieur le Docteur, you are a man of precision. You knew of Leonard's debts to Grayson, oui? And you were near the library window. But there's more. The statuette's base, where the paint was found, also bore a faint mark of scratch, as if from a ring. You wear a signet ring, do you not? Philip's hand instinctively covered his ring, his face ashen. This is absurd. I didn't touch the statuette. Miss Marple spoke softly, her voice cutting through the tension. Monsieur Poirot, Dr. Marwood's ring is distinctive, with a raised crest. It could indeed leave a mark, especially if gripped tightly. Poirot nodded. Precisement. And the paint on the statuette matches the prop Madame Marwood was handling. But she was not in the library. You, Monsieur Philip, were. You entered after Clara, argued with Leonard perhaps about his debts, which threatened your own financial stability, and in a moment of rage, you struck him. Philip stood, his voice shaking. You have no proof. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The proof is in the details. The scratch from your ring. The paint transferred from your hands after handling. Your wife's prop. The dirt you placed to mislead us. You opened the window to suggest an outsider. But you forgot the flower bed. And Clara, poor Clara. She saw you enter as she left. But her loyalty to her family kept her silent. Clara sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Evelyn rushed to her, sighed, glaring at Poirot. You're tormenting her. No, madam, Poirot said gently. I am freeing her. Dr. Marwood, confess now, and spare her further pain. Philip's shoulders slumped, his face crumpling. I didn't mean to kill him. Leonard was blackmailing me. He knew I'd borrowed from Grayson, too, to save my practice. He threatened to tell Beatrice, to ruin me. I went to confront him, and he laughed, mocked me. I grabbed the statuette. It was a moment of madness. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Inspector Grange stepped forward, his voice firm. Dr. Marwood, you're under arrest. As Philip was led away, Poirot turned to Miss Marple, his voice low. The little grey cells, they have done their work. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Indeed, Monsieur Poirot. And the smallest details the ring. The paint told the largest story. The clock struck 11, and the truth, at last, stood revealed in the quiet of Crestwood Hall. Chapter 11. The reflection the morning after Dr. Philip Marwood's confession cast a subdued pall over Crestwood Hall. The grand manor, with its ivy-clad walls and polished interiors, seemed to exhale a sigh of relief, yet the air remained heavy with the aftershocks of betrayal. The Ashburn family gathered in the drawing-room, their faces etched with a mixture of grief, shame, and quiet resignation. Hercule Poirot, his task complete, stood by the window, his small figure silhouetted against the pale sunlight. Miss Jane Marple sat near the fireplace, her knitting resumed, the gentle click of her needles a soft counterpoint to the room's somber mood. Inspector Grange had departed with Philip in custody, the formalities of arrest completed with brisk efficiency. The constable remained to gather final statements, but the heart of the mystery had been laid bare. Poirot, ever meticulous, had requested this final gathering, not to accuse but to reflect, to weave the threads of the case into a coherent tapestry. For those left behind, mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice soft but resonant. The truth has been revealed, and justice, it will take its course. But I, Hercule Poirot, believe that understanding is as vital as punishment. Let us revisit the path that led us here, so that you may find peace and clarity. Lady Beatrice, her composure frayed but intact, spoke first, her voice low. How could Philip do this? Leonard was family, flawed though he was. Poirot inclined his head. Madam, the human heart is a complex thing. Monsieur Leonard, he was reckless, yes, but also desperate. His debts to Mr. Grayson were a noose, and he sought to tighten it around others, Dr. Marwood among them. Blackmail, it is a poison that turns brother against brother. Clara, her eyes red from crying, clutched her bracelet, its bent clasp a silent reminder of her role. I should have spoken sooner, she whispered. I saw Philip enter the library, but I couldn't believe. I didn't want to believe. Miss Marple's voice was gentle. My dear, you were caught in a web of loyalty and fear. It's a heavy burden for one so young. But you told the truth in the end, and that took courage. Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching faintly. Mademoiselle Clara, your bracelet. It was the key. The threads caught in its clasp. the trace of red paint. They pointed to the struggle and to the statuette. But it was the paint, transferred from Madame Marwood's prop to Monsieur Philip's hands, that sealed his guilt. He handled the prop, perhaps in passing, and carried the paint to the statuette when he struck. Margaret, her theatrical flair subdued, sat with her head bowed. "I didn't know," she murmured. "I thought Philip was just worried about his practice. If I'd known he was in trouble with Grayson." Poirot raised a hand. "Do not blame yourself, madam. The fault lies with those who choose to act on their fears. Monsieur Philip, he was a man of pride. But pride, it can lead to ruin when cornered by desperation." Charles, his cigar absent for once, looked weary. "And Grayson, what of him? Leonard's death started this mess." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Mr. Grayson, he is a shadow in this tale, but not the killer. His threats pushed Leonard to blackmail, which pushed Philip to act. But the hand that struck was Philip's alone." Evelyn, her arm around Clara, spoke softly. "What happens now? Philip is family, despite everything." Inspector Grange, re-entering the room, answered gruffly. "He'll face trial, Mrs. Ashburn. The evidence is clear murder. Premeditated or not, he'll have his day in court." Poirot turned to the family, his tone reflective. "The little grey cells, they see what the heart cannot. The dirt by the window, placed to deceive. The clean handle of the statuette, wiped to hide. The scratch from Monsieur Philip's ring. These were the truths that could not be silenced. But know this, the truth, it sets free, even as it wounds." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, and she spoke, her voice warm but firm. "In my village, I've seen many secrets unravel. People hide their fears, their shame, but they cannot hide from themselves forever. You'll heal in time, but you must face the truth first." Lady Beatrice stood, her voice steady despite her pallor. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, Miss Marple. This has been a painful clarity, but necessary. We shall carry on, as we always have." Poirot bowed slightly. "It is my duty, madam, to bring order where there is chaos. And now, I take my leave. The train to London awaits, and Hercule Poirot, he has other puzzles to solve." As the family murmured their farewells, Miss Marple approached Poirot, her eyes twinkling. "You've done well, Monsieur Poirot. The little grey cells, they never fail, do they?" Poirot's smile was warm. "Nor do your observations, Mademoiselle Marple. Together, we have woven a fine net. Non." They stepped into the hall, where the butler, Mr. Harrow, waited with their coats. The clock struck noon, and as Poirot and Miss Marple left Crestwood Hall, the manor seemed to settle, its secrets laid bare, its shadows a little less heavy under the weight of truth. Chapter 12. Echoes of motif. At afternoon sun bathed Crestwood Hall in a soft, golden light, but the warmth did little to dispel the lingering chill within its walls. The Ashburn family, though relieved by the resolution of Leonard's murder, moved with the cautious steps of those still grappling with betrayal. Hercule Poirot had departed for London, his task complete, but Miss Jane Marple remained, at Lady Beatrice's quiet insistence, to offer her gentle wisdom in the aftermath. She sat in the morning room, her knitting needles clicking softly, her sharp blue eyes observing the family's subdued interactions through the open door. To the drawing room, the revelation of Dr. Philip Marwood's guilt had left a fracture in the family's unity, and Miss Marple, ever attuned to the nuances of human nature, sensed that questions lingered, questions not of guilt, but of motive. Why had Philip, a man of restraint and intellect, succumbed to such a desperate act? She knew that understanding the heart of the crime was as vital as uncovering the culprit, and she resolved to piece together the final threads for the family's sake. Lady Beatrice entered the morning room, her posture as regal as ever, though her eyes betrayed a weariness. "Miss Marple," she said, settling into a chair, "you've seen us through a dark time, but I cannot help wondering, why Philip? What drove him to such an act?" Miss Marple's needles paused, and she looked up, her expression kind but searching. "My dear Lady Beatrice, the motives of the heart are often tangled. Dr. Marwood was a proud man, was he not? And pride, when threatened, can lead to desperate measures." Lady Beatrice nodded slowly. "He was always so composed. But Leonard's recklessness it wore on us all." Miss Marple set her knitting aside. "May I speak with the others? There are echoes of this tragedy that need airing, if you're to find peace." Lady Beatrice consented, and soon the family gathered in the drawing room, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Clara, still pale, sat beside Evelyn, who held her hand tightly. Charles, his usual bluster subdued, leaned against the fireplace, while Margaret, her theatrical flair muted, sat alone, her eyes distant. Miss Marple began, her voice gentle but clear. "My friends, Monsieur Poirot has revealed the truth of Leonard's death, but understanding why it happened is part of healing. Dr. Marwood's act was not born in a moment, but in a web of pressures, debts, secrets, and fear. Let us speak of what drove him." Charles spoke first, his voice gruff. "Philip was in over his head with Grayson, just like Leonard. I warned them both. Grayson's not a man to cross." Miss Marple nodded. "And Leonard, he used that knowledge, didn't he? He threatened to expose Philip's debts to you, Lady Beatrice, knowing it would ruin him." Clara's voice trembled. "Uncle Leonard was cruel sometimes. He told me Philip owed Grayson thousands, that he'd lose his practice. I didn't know what to do." Evelyn's grip on Clara's hand tightened. "You should have told me, darling. I could have helped." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "Clara was afraid, Mrs. Ashburn. She saw Philip enter the library that night, but loyalty kept her silent. And Philip, he was cornered by debt, by Leonard's blackmail, by the fear of losing everything." Margaret looked up, her voice barely audible. "I knew Philip was worried, but he never told me how bad it was. If I'd known, I might have stopped him." Miss Marple's gaze was steady. "You couldn't have known, Mrs. Marwood." Philip hid his fears, as proud men often do. "But the paint on the statuette came from your prop, did it not? He must have handled it that day, perhaps in a moment of distraction." Margaret nodded, tears in her eyes. "I was painting a frame for my play. He helped me move it. I didn't think anything of it." Miss Marple continued, her voice a soothing balm. "The red paint, the scratch from Philip's ring, the dirt by the window, these were the clues that told the story. Philip confronted Leonard, hoping to silence him. When Leonard mocked him, his pride snapped, and he struck. It was not planned, but it was fatal." Lady Beatrice's voice was low. "And the dirt, the window, he staged it all?" "Yes," Miss Marple said. "He placed the dirt to suggest an outsider, opened the window to mislead. But he forgot the flower bed outside, untouched, and the paint, which linked him to the statuette. Monsieur Poirot saw it all, as he always does." Charles rubbed his face, his voice heavy. "Grayson's the root of this. If he hadn't pressed Leonard and Philip—" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "Mr. Grayson is a hard man, but he did not strike the blow. Philip chose his path, as we all choose ours. The lesson, I think, is to speak truths before they fester. Clara looked up, her voice small. I should have told someone about the argument. If I had, maybe. Miss Marple reached out, her hand gentle on Clara's. You did what you thought was right, my dear. And in the end, your courage helped uncover the truth. The family sat in silence, the weight of the past days settling into a shared understanding. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the needles clicking softly. In my village, she said, I've seen many tragedies born of silence. Speak to one another, share your burdens, and Crestwood Hall will heal. Lady Beatrice stood, her voice firm despite her grief. Thank you, Miss Marple. Your wisdom, and Monsieur Poiret's, has given us a path forward. As the family dispersed, Miss Marple remained, her gaze drifting to the garden beyond. The echoes of motive had been laid bare, and though the scars would linger, the truth had begun to mend the fractures in Crestwood Hall. The clock struck 2, and Miss Marple prepared to take her leave, her work here nearly done. Chapter 13. The weight of Secret's late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Crestwood Hall, casting a gentle glow over the drawing room where Miss Jane Marple sat alone, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm. The Ashburn family had retreated to their private corners of the manor, each grappling with the aftermath of Dr. Philip Marwood's confession and the revelations that had followed. The air, though lighter with the truth now exposed, still carried the weight of secrets unspoken. And Miss Marple, ever sensitive to the undercurrents of human nature, sensed that a few threads remained to be tied. Lady Beatrice had invited Miss Marple to stay another day, a gesture born of gratitude and perhaps a need for the quiet wisdom she offered. As the clock on the mantel ticked toward 4, Clara entered the room, her face pale but resolute, her bent bracelet still clasped around her wrist. She hesitated at the threshold, then approached, her steps tentative. Miss Marple, she said, softly, may I speak with you? There's something I haven't told anyone, not even Monsieur Poiret. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her eyes kind but searching. Of course, my dear. Sit down. What troubles you? Clara perched on the edge of a chair, her fingers twisting the bracelet. It's about Uncle Leonard. He wasn't just arguing about debts that night. When I was in the library with him at 8, he said something strange. He said, if I go down, I won't go alone. I didn't understand then, but now, I think he meant to expose more than just Uncle Philip. Miss Marple's gaze sharpened, though her voice remained gentle. Expose, you say? Did he mention anyone else? A name, perhaps? Clara shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. No, but he was so angry, so desperate. He said he'd written it all down, somewhere safe. I thought he meant his notebook, but Monsieur Poiret already found that. Miss Marple's needles lay still in her lap. Written it down, you say? Somewhere safe. That's very interesting. Clara, did he often keep secrets in writing? Clara nodded. He was always scribbling notes, ideas for plays, sometimes letters he never sent. He had a box in his room, locked, where he kept his private papers. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. A locked box, you say? Perhaps we should have a look. With Lady Beatrice's permission, of course. Clara hesitated, then nodded. They sought out Lady Beatrice, who, though weary, agreed to let them examine Leonard's room. The 3 women ascended to the 2nd floor, where Leonard's bedroom overlooked the rose garden. The room was tidy, its desk cluttered with scripts and books. but Miss Marple's attention was drawn to a small, polished wooden box on the bedside table, its lock gleaming in the fading light. Lady Beatrice produced a key from a drawer, her hands trembling slightly. "Leonard was secretive about this box," she said. "I never pried." Miss Marple nodded, her voice soothing. "Sometimes secrets must be shared to bring peace." The box opened with a soft click, revealing a collection of papers, letters, receipts, and a small, leather-bound journal. Miss Marple leafed through it carefully, her eyes scanning Leonard's angular handwriting. One entry, dated a week before his death, caught her attention. "Grayson's threats grow sharper. But Charles is no saint. His dealings with G are not what they seem. If I must, I'll tell all." Miss Marple showed the page to Lady Beatrice, whose face paled. "Charles? What dealings?" Clara's voice was a whisper. "Uncle Charles was always arguing with Leonard about money. I thought it was just family squabbles." Miss Marple closed the journal, her expression thoughtful. "It seems Leonard held many secrets." "Lady Beatrice, this journal suggests Charles may have had his own ties to Mr. Grayson, ties he kept hidden." Lady Beatrice's voice was firm, though strained. "I'll speak to Charles. If he's entangled with Grayson, I need to know." They returned to the drawing room, where Charles was summoned. His face, already lined with fatigue, grew taut as Lady Beatrice confronted him with the journal's contents. "What did you know about Grayson, Charles? What were you hiding?" Charles sank into a chair, his bluster gone. "It's not what you think, Mother. Grayson approached me months ago, offering to fund a venture a new textile mill. I refused. But Leonard found out and threatened to tell you I'd considered it. He thought it would make you doubt my loyalty to the family." Miss Marple's voice was gentle but probing. "And did you argue with Leonard about this, Mr. Ashburn? Perhaps in the library, before his death?" Charles shook his head vehemently. "No. I was in the billiard room, as I said. I didn't know Leonard was in the library until it was too late." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes meeting Clara's. "Thank you for your honesty, Clara. This journal, it explains Leonard's desperation, his threats. It wasn't just Philip he targeted, but others, too." Lady Beatrice's voice was heavy. "Leonard's recklessness brought this upon us all. But it's over now." Miss Marple's smile was kind. "Not quite, Lady Beatrice. Understanding heals, but it takes time. Charles, Clara, you must speak openly now. Let no more secrets fester." As the family dispersed, Clara lingered, her voice soft. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I feel lighter, somehow." Miss Marple patted her hand. "Truth is a heavy burden, my dear, but it's lighter when shared." The clock struck 5, and the shadows in Crestwood Hall seemed to soften, the weight of secrets lifting, if only slightly, as the family faced the truth together. Chapter 14. The ties that bind the evening at Crestwood Hall settled over the manor like a quiet veil, the golden hues of the setting sun casting long shadows through the drawing room's tall windows. The Ashburn family, though still reeling from the revelations of Leonard's murder and Philip's confession, seemed to move with a tentative sense of purpose, as if the unburdening of secrets had begun to mend their fractured bonds. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting needles clicking softly, sat in her familiar chair by the fireplace, her serene presence a steady anchor amidst the family's turmoil. Lady Beatrice had insisted she stay one more night, and Miss Marple, sensing the family's need for closure, had agreed. The discovery of Leonard's journal had cast new light on the tensions within the family, particularly Charles's hidden dealings with Mr. Grayson. Miss Marple knew that while Philip's guilt had been established, the ripples of Leonard's actions and the secrets he wielded still lingered, threatening the family's fragile recovery. She resolved to guide them toward a final understanding, to tie the remaining threads of the mystery into a coherent whole. Lady Beatrice entered the drawing room, her face weary but resolute. "Miss Marple," she said, settling into a chair, "your presence has been a blessing, but I confess, I'm troubled by what we found in Leonard's journal. Charles's involvement with Grayson. It feels like another betrayal." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes kind but piercing. "My dear Lady Beatrice, families are bound by love, but also by secrets. Charles's silence was not betrayal, but fear of losing your trust. Let us speak with him again, and, with the others, to lay all truths bare." Lady Beatrice nodded, and soon the family gathered once more, their faces reflecting a mix of apprehension and hope. Charles stood by the window, his hands clasped tightly, while Evelyn sat close to Clara, her protective gaze unwavering. Margaret, her theatrical poise softened by grief, sat quietly, her eyes fixed on the floor. Miss Marple began, her voice gentle but firm. "My friends, the truth about Leonard's death has been uncovered, but the ties that bind you, love, loyalty, fear, have been strained. Leonard's journal revealed not just Philip's desperation, but Charles's secrets. Let us speak of them now, so that you may heal." Charles turned from the window, his voice low. "I told you, Mother, I refused Grayson's offer, but Leonard wouldn't let it go. He thought he could use it against me, to make me look disloyal." Miss Marple nodded. "And that, Mr. Ashburn, is why Leonard's threats were so dangerous. He saw secrets as weapons, not just against Philip, but against you. Did you ever confront him about this?" Charles shook his head, his jaw tight. "No, I avoided him. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction." Evelyn spoke up, her voice trembling. "Leonard was always stirring trouble. He'd taunt Clara about her painting, Charles about the estate, even Philip about his practice. I tried to keep the peace, but..." Clara's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "He wasn't always cruel. Sometimes he'd encourage me, tell me my paintings were good, but then he'd turn, say they'd never sell, that I was wasting my time." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "Leonard was a man of contradictions, my dear. He used his charm and his cruelty to control those around him. But his secrets, written in that journal, were his undoing." Margaret looked up, her voice hesitant. "I should have seen how desperate Philip was. He never told me about Grayson, about the blackmail. If I'd known." Miss Marple's tone was soothing. "You couldn't have known, Mrs. Marwood. Philip's pride kept him silent, just as Charles's pride kept him from admitting his talks with Grayson. But silence breeds mistrust, and mistrust breeds tragedy." Lady Beatrice's voice was steady, though her eyes glistened. "What do we do now, Miss Marple? How do we move forward?" Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her gaze sweeping the room. "You speak to one another, openly and honestly. Charles, you must trust your mother with the truth of your dealings. Clara, share your fears, your hopes. Evelyn, let Clara stand on her own, for she is stronger than you know. And Margaret, grieve for Philip, but do not let guilt consume you." Clara reached for her mother's hand, her voice stronger. "I want to paint again, Mother. Not for Leonard, not for anyone, but for me." Evelyn's smile was tentative but warm. "Then you shall, darling." Charles stepped forward, his voice heavy. "Mother, I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Grayson. I thought I was protecting the family. Lady Beatrice reached out, her hand resting on his. You're my son, Charles. We'll face this together. Margaret wiped her eyes, her voice soft. I'll go back to the stage, but not to escape, to honor what Philip and I had. Before all this. Miss Marple's smile was warm. That's the way, my dears. The ties that bind you are not broken, only strained. Mend them with truth, and Crestwood Hall will stand stronger for it. As the family dispersed, their steps lighter, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the needles clicking in rhythm with the ticking clock. The manor, though scarred, was beginning to heal. Its secrets no longer a weight but a bridge to understanding. The clock struck 7, and Miss Marple prepared to take her leave, her heart content that the Ashburns were finding their way forward. Chapter 15. The quiet departure. The morning sun rose gently over Crestwood Hall, its rays filtering through the ancient oaks and bathing the Georgian manor in a serene light. The turmoil of the past days seemed to soften in the dawn's embrace. Though the scars of Leonard's murder and Philip's confession lingered in the hearts of the Ashburn family, Miss Jane Marple, her small suitcase packed, stood in the hall, her knitting bag slung over her arm, her serene demeanor a quiet beacon of calm. Lady Beatrice had insisted on arranging a car to take her to the station, a gesture of gratitude for the wisdom she had shared. The family gathered to bid her farewell, their faces reflecting a fragile hope amidst their grief. Lady Beatrice, her regal bearing softened by gratitude, clasped Miss Marple's hands. You've given us more than answers, Miss Marple, she said, her voice steady but warm. You've given us a path to heal. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, her smile gentle. My dear Lady Beatrice, the truth can be a bitter medicine, but it mends what silence breaks. Your family is strong. You will find your way. Clara, standing beside Evelyn, stepped forward, her bent bracelet still on her wrist, now a symbol of her courage rather than her fear. Thank you, Miss Marple, she said softly. I'm going to paint again, like you said, for myself. Miss Marple patted her hand. And you'll do splendidly, my dear. Trust your heart and let it guide your brush. Charles, his usual bluster replaced by a quiet resolve, nodded. I'll be honest with Mother from now on. No more secrets about Grayson or anything else. Evelyn's smile was tentative but genuine. We'll help Clara and each other. You've shown us how, Miss Marple. Margaret, her eyes still shadowed by Philip's betrayal, spoke quietly. I'm returning to the stage, but not to hide. I'll perform for myself, and for what Philip and I once were. Miss Marple's gaze swept over them, her voice warm but firm. In my village of St. Mary Mead, I've seen many families face their shadows. The Ashburns are no different. You've faced yours with courage, and now you must live with honesty. That is the true strength of Crestwood Hall. The butler, Mr. Harrow, appeared with news that the car was ready. As Miss Marple moved toward the door, Lady Beatrice handed her a small parcel of fine lace shawl, a token of the family's gratitude. For your kindness, she said simply. Miss Marple accepted it with a gracious nod. You're very kind, Lady Beatrice. I shall think of Crestwood Hall whenever I wear it. As she stepped into the car, the family stood on the steps, their figures framed by the manor's grand facade. The driver started the engine, and Miss Marple glanced back, her sharp blue eyes taking in the scene one last time. She thought of Hercule Poirot, whose little gray cells had unraveled the mystery, and of her own quiet observations, the bracelet, the paint, the dirt that had helped guide him to the truth. The car wound through the Devonshire hills, and Miss Marple's thoughts turned to her own village, where the rhythms of life were simpler but no less complex in their human dramas. She reflected on Leonard's desperation, Philip's pride, and Clara's courage, and on the power of truth to heal even the deepest wounds. As the train station came into view, Miss Marple smiled faintly, her knitting needles ready to resume their rhythm on the journey home. The mystery of Crestwood Hall was solved, its secrets laid bare, and the Ashburns were on their path to recovery. Her work here was done, and St. Mary Mead awaited, with its own quiet puzzles and familiar faces. The clock struck 10, and as the car slowed, Miss Marple stepped out, her heart light with the knowledge that, in the end, truth had drowned out the lies.